Ed and Lorraine Warren are names that will be synonymous with demonology forever. But what about their personal facts that no one knows about? Now, those tidbits of information are actually horrific. So I recently had the opportunity to sit down and chat with someone who was allegedly exorcised by the Warrens in their later years, and the entire possession case was a scam, set up to see if these folks could actually trick the experts. So this took place at a haunted house in Connecticut, and the folks there were claiming that some sort of demonic entity was possessing a room in their establishment, and that there was a demonic mask involved, one of their employees was indeed possessed, etc, etc, etc. So Ed and Lorraine made a trip out and claimed, yep, there's something demonic here, and an exorcism was necessary. They were picking up all sorts of readings on their devices, the demons were saying something about wages, and what do you know, this was all fake. Now my friend, who prefers to remain anonymous due to his very public line of work, claimed that the Warrens performed an exorcism on him while he faked being possessed, and only became healed when he realized that the elastic on the cursed mask was about to snap. He was also kind of exhausted from faking being so possessed. So much for expert knowledge. This next little bit of information isn't as terrifying in the traditional sense, but bear with me. So if you watch the film franchise, you'd think Ed and Lorraine had a pretty ideal, wholesome, perfect Americana family-style life, but the reality isn't so shiny or pure. In the early 1960s, Ed Warren initiated a relationship with somebody that was way too young for him, and Lorraine knew about it. Ed Warren was in his mid-30s when he met Judith, who was about half his age. Yeah, yucky. Having not yet gained enough fame as a self-trained demonologist to pay the bills, Ed was working as a city bus driver in Monroe, Connecticut, while Judith was a student in the nearby town of Bridgeport who, well, rode his bus. The two began an amorous relationship, according to a legal declaration from Judith in November of 2014. Turns out by 1963, she had moved into the Warrens' home, and for the next 40 or so years, she had a very close relationship with Ed with Lorraine's knowledge. Well, that same year, Judith was arrested after somebody reported her relationship with Ed to the police. Rightfully so, and she spent a night in the North End prison in Bridgeport while police tried to persuade her to sign a statement admitting to the affair. After she refused to cooperate, she was ordered by the court to report to a delinquent office for the next month. Well, Ed picked her up from school every week and drove her to the mandated meetings. Judith claimed that Ed told her many times that she was the love of his life, and the Warrens explained her presence in the home as a niece or some poor girl they'd taken in out of charity. She helped them out with office tasks. In May of 1978, while in her 30s, Judith became pregnant with Ed's offspring, and Lorraine persuaded her to get rid of it, because that could have been a public scandal. Now, if that wasn't awful enough, Judith has also claimed that Ed was, on occasion, physically offensive to Lorraine. Apparently, there was one night in particular where she saw Ed harm Lorraine to the point where Lorraine lost consciousness. Now, while it might be easy to dismiss all of these claims as hooey or somebody trying to make something out of nothing, there's an interesting element from Lorraine. Yeah, she's talked about this in a way that kind of proves this to be true. So when Lorraine Warren signed on to consult on the Conjuring movies, she got a contract that stated the movies will not feature negative information about the Warrens, mentioning specifically intercourse with folks outside of their marriage, anything to do with women of the night, or violence. Which is kind of weird to have to spell that out if you don't have anything to worry about. Just saying. Do you know how Ed and Lorraine got their start in all this demonology stuff? Because honestly, before I started sharing info with y'all, I never really dug too much into the personal lives of Ed and Lorraine Warren, preferring to focus, interests on their professional work, and I only really knew about their daughter Judy. Yeah, they had a daughter from the rare time they mentioned her in one of their books, and her husband because of all the rare footage he's publicized since their death, which we'll get more on in a moment. So it turns out Lorraine was still in school when she first started seeing auras. She thought this was something everybody saw, but she found out pretty quickly otherwise when she brought it up at her Catholic school. She compared the lights surrounding the Mother Superior and another sister, and was told immediately to never talk of what she saw ever again. So she learned to either hide her gifts or choke it off. Whereas Ed, on the other hand, grew up in a haunted house. He'd look into closets and see faces, one specifically of an old lady. The temperature in his room would drop and he would hear footsteps, heavy breathing, and when he brought it up to his father, he was like, oh, there's a logical explanation for everything. Leave it at that. So Ed and Lorraine both did their very best to try and ignore their gifts. They wanted to live normal lives, but the universe drew them together and had different plans. Ed had a near-death experience while serving in the Navy, and when the ship he was on collided with an oil tanker in the North Atlantic. A fire erupted and everybody had to jump overboard, and as Ed was in the icy water, he prayed for help and was soon rescued, believing it to be from cosmic interference. After that, he returned home, asked Lorraine to marry him, and they got married almost immediately. After the war, Ed took up a profession as a fine arts painter, with the duo traveling from fair to sell their wares, and this became very helpful during the beginnings of their work. They would research houses they believed to be haunted, then drive there, and after Ed would paint the house, he'd hand the painting to Lorraine, she'd go knock on the door and offer the painting to the homeowners as like a ticket inside. So she'd strike up conversation, maybe learn about the hauntings. At one house, which already had some local notoriety as a supernatural hotspot, Lorraine actually went into a spontaneous trance, and claims that's where she learned not to fear death. Just so we all have the same context going into this next bit, the White Lady is the name of the ghost that haunts the Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut. A lot of locals believe her to be the ghost of Harriet Seeley, whose young son passed shortly after being born, with Harriet herself passing soon afterward. Legend believes she may have died in hopes of finding her son. She still wanders their final resting place, searching him out. Now other folks think maybe she's the ghost of a woman from the 1940s who killed her husband, and later took her own life, and is doomed to wander the graveyard. Her physical description is the one thing that remains consistent. She's a young woman wearing a white dress with dark hair, and it seems like she enjoys scaring the living daylights out of anybody. Many who have witnessed her believe they have almost hit her with their vehicle, only to find no trace of her once they pull over, whereas other folks claim they have seen her hovering slightly above the ground around the cemetery, going back and forth amongst the different tombstones. So Ed Warren was absolutely obsessed with her. He's gone on record. He was determined to capture footage of this white lady, and once upon a time he was able to do so, and he kept the tape for himself. Yeah, he hoarded that tape like it held the secrets to the universe, or like he was the US government with all the proof they have of alien life. He allowed a very select few people to view it while it was being held in his personal archives, and nobody was allowed to analyze it on their own time. Ever since the passing of both Ed and Lorraine, their son-in-law, Tony Spera, has released the footage in its entirety to YouTube. If you look at the tape, it shows an apparent white human figure moving behind some tombstones. Like videos of UFOs, Bigfoot, other cryptids, the figure is at a perfect distance and resolution so that you can see a shape, but you don't see any definitive details. Remember Judith Penny? So when Ed claimed to have captured the White Lady on tape, apparently Judith was the mystical being spotted on tape. She just masked herself with a white sheet. Oldest trick in the book. By the way, has anyone ever stopped to try and legitimize most of the junk in the Warren Museum? Let's get the facts straight. Ed and Lorraine were investigating numerous cases from like the 1950s until they passed, right? And they founded a whole society devoted to the research and investigation of the paranormal in 1952, not to mention their entire museum dedicated to objects from their cases. So explain to me how their website only has 10 public case files, and a lot of the stuff in their museum looks like leftovers from a Spirit Halloween. Doesn't anybody else find it pretty suspicious that we only get details from their really big news cases, while artifacts from other lesser cases are barely a footnote and have no story or witnesses attached? So if you're gonna look at a tour of the museum, in one corner is the skin of a tiger that is said to have killed 33 people in India while possessed by a demonic spirit. But when I try to research this weird tiger, I find no account of any reportings in history about such a case, or any offers from Ed and Lorraine to go into detail about any events leading to how it came into their possession. We've got a lot of the photos. Given what I know about modern day Satanism, one of the idols in the museum looks like a papier-mâché alien mock-up. Fun fact folks, a lot of people who practice Satanism don't actually pray to any sort of idol or to the devil. Well, that's the end of today everybody. I've been Alexa, your resident ookie spooky girly. See ya!